Hello, and welcome to the Great Catholic Parishes webinar. Welcome from all over the world. There are 300 of you registered for this webinar from 31 states, 17 of you here in Texas, where I am. If you are in Texas, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to stop by your parish or your diocese sometime. Just email me, john@greatcatholicparishes.org. We've got 24 Canucks joining us from Canada. Africa. We've got folks in Benin, Cameroon, and South Africa. And then Malta. I had to look, you're right there between Italy and Africa. Thank you for joining us. And then Israel. Matthew, who is at the Church of the Holy Family in the old city of Jerusalem. I have been in your church. You are joining us from Jerusalem, Israel. Thank you, Matthew. So why are we doing this webinar? This webinar called Accompanying People with Disabilities and Sensory-Friendly Mass. Well, we're doing it because there's 44 million Americans who have some sort of disability in their lives. And this number represents about 1 in 4 adults. And so if you knew that something greatly impacted a quarter of all the people in your country, as a parishioner, as a minister, as someone trying to reach people with the love of Christ, is that something that would be important to you? And the second thing is that it doesn't just impact people with disabilities. It impacts their families. It impacts people who you might not think it would impact. There's something I was introduced to by my friends down at St. Jerome in Waco called the curb cut effect. And I want to just show you a picture because I'm certain you'll be familiar with this when you see it. A curb cut is where they cut into the curb to make it more accessible for people. Now, originally, this was only done in urban areas. You see this in big cities, dangerous places to walk, crossing intersections. But now there's hardly a neighborhood that you don't see these going in. This was freshly poured the week that I walked past it. And the reason is this: when they started implementing curb cuts, they started getting reports from people that they didn't realize that it would be helpful for. Mothers with strollers, people that just need a little more time and a little more help getting across the street. A mom with a bunch of kids trying to get them across the street, little ones walking. And what it created was the curb cut effect, which is this realization that when we create accommodations for a group of people, it helps people way beyond what we realized. And really, when we accommodate those in need, it really helps everyone. And so that is another great reason to think about what we're talking about today. If you notice, the title of this webinar is Accompanying People with Disabilities. It's not serving, it's not helping, it's accompanying. Because everyone should be accompanied by someone who understands what you're going through, someone who sees beyond the surface and cares about your life. And that's what we're talking about today. Pope Francis took particular interest in helping people with disabilities and bringing greater awareness to it, in changing the way that we think about them and communicate about them and relate to them. A couple of quotes from him. He says, welcoming people with disabilities and responding to their needs is a duty of the civil and ecclesial communities. It is a responsibility of both secular and sacred communities to welcome and care about people with disabilities. And then he goes on to talk about a deeper issue, which Andrea and I have talked about, and we'll talk about more today, is this idea of inclusion and belonging versus just welcoming or accepting or tolerating. He says there is no inclusion if the experience of fraternity and mutual communion is missing. There's no inclusion if it remains a slogan or a formula to be used in politically correct language. There is no inclusion if there is no conversion in the practices of coexistence and relationships. That there's something bigger than just making small accommodations. There's an inclusion, there's a loving, there's a belonging, and there's a belief, I think, that isn't just we're letting you into this. There's a belief that we're not complete without you, and that we have things to learn from you, and you enrich our lives. And so we want you to be a part. That's enough from me. I'm going to introduce our guests today. Two of them are with us live. Andrea Vacek. Did I get that right?
You got it.
All right. Andrea's coming to us from St. Pius X in Billings. I've been to your parish, such a great place. You got such a great pastor there. She's a children's ministry coordinator. Ann Masters, Dr. Ann Masters, is coming to us from Newark. She's the director of the Office of Pastoral Ministry with Persons with Disabilities from the Archdiocese of Newark. And then later we'll hear from Joellyn Cicciarelli, president and publisher of Loyola Press Chicago, and then Sarah Olson, who's a parishioner at St. Vincent de Paul in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Andrea, come on, let's talk about this. You are the reason this whole webinar is happening. I had been a part of working with your parish for several years through consulting, and you just reached out and said, when are you going to do a webinar on accompanying people with special needs and disabilities and their families? And I said, tell me more about it. And you started by sharing your story. So I would love to hear how this has impacted your life from childhood.
Absolutely. So I grew up about 60 miles south of Houston in this rural area. And my brother was one of the first people in Texas to be diagnosed with autism. He actually went to a segregated school for children with disabilities, and his case was taken before the Texas Supreme Court to desegregate disabled schools in Texas. Growing up, I had a single mom, and my brother has profound disabilities in terms of mental retardation, his autism, but epilepsy, lots of things. And my mom was trying to find community, trying to find support. And the most obvious place to start is the church. And every time we would go to a new congregation, whether it was Protestant, Catholic, it didn't matter. We were always told, he's too noisy, too disruptive. God speaks to him in a special way. You don't need to come. You don't need to bring him. And so we were kicked out of every single church in our area and asked not to come back. We finally found a traditionally Black congregation that gave him a tambourine and let him run up and down the aisles. But eventually it just became, too hard, too overwhelming, too much for our family to get to Mass every week. And again, we have to remember that people with disabilities are not perpetually children. My brother became an adult grown man. And so trying to control an adult man that has sensory problems as well as these other problems going on became just too much for a single parent to control. And so basically, again, we were just asked to leave. And, so that turned not only my mother away from the faith, but me for the longest time.
Wow. I'm so sorry that you went through that, and that so many people still go through that. I mean, that's part of what's driving this, is we don't want people to go through that. And how did that feel? How did it affect your perception of God and the church?
Well, for me, I couldn't understand it. I could not understand when people were like, everyone is welcome, everyone belongs, you belong here, but he doesn't, right? As long as you act a certain way, as long as you dress a certain way, as long as you can sit quietly and not move, not speak, not make any noise, then you can come. Yeah. And that was not my reality. My brother is in constant movement, in constant sound. And so to be in a place where the expectation is that you have to be a church mouse, essentially, was completely foreign. And so I just did not understand this mentality of everyone belongs, except, there was always this exception. And so it just really put me off of organized religion in general. I wanted to believe that there was more out there, and I was very jealous of my friends who had congregations where they felt like they always had someone to talk to, always had a place where they felt like they belonged, because that was never an experience for me.
Yeah, I think you touch on a bigger issue there of how strong the human desire for belonging is, and that it transcends theology, it transcends ethnicity, right? That, if there is not a place at your parish for these people and these families to belong, they might leave the Catholic Church altogether and go somewhere else. And I know you may be able to make some theological argument as to why you think that's wrong, but I don't think we can discount the need and desire for humans to belong and feel loved and accepted and welcomed. And as you said, shouldn't the church be the place that happens the most profoundly? Now, this wasn't just a childhood experience for you. This is an experience for you as a parent also. Share with us about that.
Right. So, as tends to happen, autism, ADHD, things like that runs in families. And so, my own child, my daughter, she has ADHD and is, we're thinking she's on the spectrum, but we haven't quite got there yet. And I just remember, I married into the Catholic Church. That's when I went through my conversion process. My husband's a cradle Catholic, and I had a lot of reservations about just how rigid in structure, but these were all preconceived notions, right? Like you hear all these preconceived notions about the Catholic Church being, very ordered and very, they're the most conservative of all of the churches. And so I was very nervous, but starting to bring in a child who could not wear church clothes because they were too itchy, too scratchy, couldn't sit still, couldn't, is constantly in movement, constantly needing fidgeting. At first when she was, an infant, it was like, we went to the cry room, right? Because that's where, we didn't want to disturb anyone. But as she started to like outgrow a nursery, it just became more and more apparent that we weren't welcome in the pews. She brings a lot of quiet fidgets, but she is in constant movement. She is constantly reading, flipping through books, missalettes, things, and up and down, up and down. And we would get looks. We would hear comments under people's breath like, why does she have toys in mass? Like she's supposed to be paying attention. And even people turning around, and it just felt like all eyes were on us, no matter how much we tried to keep her quiet, keep her still, come prepared, right? There was always these looks, comments, and it was just such a fight. It felt like it wasn't even worth it to come, because we just left exhausted, exasperated, and it became more of a punishment for her to come to mass as instead of a joyful experience.
Wow. And you mentioned the cry room. And for those who might think that's a good solution, can you explain as a parent why that doesn't feel loving or empowering?
So the cry room is great when you have a baby that's crying, right? But what sets my daughter has sensory integration problems, which means that her input is just so overwhelming that her brain cannot process it the way that most of us can. And so when there's a lot of noise and a lot of things going on, she goes into fight or flight. And so when we go into cry rooms, there are flashing lights, banging toys, kids crying, parents yelling at their kids to be quiet, all kinds of things. And so it was even more sensory input than what was out in the pews. So it causes an escalation of behavior as opposed to a reduction in behavior. And it could also be, eventually we don't want 8, 9, 10 teenagers in cry rooms, right? It's not good for them. It's not safe for toddlers and babies. But especially when these adults are having these older kids or adults are having these sensory issues, there can be a physical reaction, and we don't want, a parent with a baby in arms to be, I don't want to say victim, but accidentally caught in the crossfire of that, right? Where a more secluded pew in a quieter area would be a better solution.
Yeah, there's a lot of better solutions, and there's a lot of great resources out there right now. And there's just a lot happening in this space right now. It's so exciting. When you introduced me to this idea and I started researching it, I don't think I've ever researched a webinar so much. And you and I've been working on this for like maybe 6 months. And I could easily do 2 or 3 webinars on this. And we will go over today. I'm just letting you know if you're watching, we'll probably go over 10 or 15 minutes because, and I've had to cut a lot of things to even fit that in. But I'd like to go to Dr. Ann Masters now in Newark. She's the director of the Office of Pastoral Ministry with Persons with Disabilities at the Archdiocese of Newark. Have a lot of great friends there. And Dr. Masters, would you start by just telling us, first of all, why that name, why that language, and then how your office got started?
First, I want to comment. I have to comment on the cry room thing. There's a great story that a Baptist friend told me, Bill Gaventa, who's in Texas, about a crying baby in a Catholic mass, and the mother stands up to take the baby out, and the priest stops and says, "No, we baptize that child. That child stays here." So if we don't want crying babies, that's kind of like, I mean, babies cry, right? That's part of it. So I just want to say something for people to think about. So yes, pastoral ministry with persons with disabilities. As we know, language always evolves. It's continuing to evolve. This ministry originally was called the Apostolate for the Intellectually Disabled. And it was originally in Catholic Charities. Now, the general scope of this work has a long tradition. It was initiated, so when there was first a national organization of ministry with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental retardation in the language of the day, National Apostolate for the Mentally Retired. The first president of the board was a priest from Newark, Father Matthew Pazzanello. And he had a master's in special education when he was first ordained. He was actually based at a parish that had a religious education set program for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And in fact, that was kind of, there were 16 centers in the Archdiocese, and that was kind of the model that typically, and was the model when I started also. But when I started this ministry, I was in the final year of my master's in theology. And, apostolate is the work of a people. And since I don't have intellectual disability, that seemed disingenuous. I also have to disclose, I have ADHD. I realized it when I was 37. My son was diagnosed when he was 4.5. Had I known growing up, I'd probably be a mathematician, but that's another story for another time. But had I not learned it, I never would have gone on to grad school, trust me. I would not have been able to manage it. The amount of reading and processing. So I understand, I do understand, some of the experiences of disability. But so anyway, the ministry was originally located in a division of Catholic Charities, but within a year I was able to have it relocated within the Archdiocesan Pastoral Center, which really is where it belongs because it's rooted in baptism, affirming the baptism of folks with disabilities to fully participate in the life of the church, not just having a space, made for people in the pew. And so, and also because there was a ministry with the deaf, and that's folks who, communicate mostly through sign language, American Sign Language, but who do not consider themselves disabled. So we've always been separate. But anyway, so that's why it became pastoral ministry with persons with disabilities, because it's walking with people, not fixing anyone.
What do you bring to the parishes of Newark? What does your office provide for them, and how do you help them accompany people and their families?
And I also want to note too that the ministry is located within the Secretariat for Parish Vitality. And when it also first came, it was the Vicar Vicariate for Pastoral Life, not just catechetical office, which is often where the ministry is located, unless it's in an alphabet soup of offices, which is kind of like everything, wearing lots of different hats. And the reason is because, yes, it's involved with catechesis, but it's also involved with affirming baptism and fully being engaged. So the mission of the office is to empower parishes, first of all, to recognize folks with disabilities as integral members of the body of Christ, and to empower them to support meaningful participation, and also to encourage relationships and interaction, and for folks with disabilities to feel a true sense of belonging. That's the vision and mission of it. It's living out the Archdiocese mission to be sacrament of Christ's presence in the world, right? And so I do this in a combination of ways of parish outreach, of accompanying pastoral leaders, of accompanying individuals and families with disabilities, workshops, a pastoral newsletter. But the emphasis of it is based within the principles of Catholic social teaching. And so it's it's based on recognition of the dignity of the human person, to require access to the things of a fully human life. And what I found that gets in the way often is the stories you were talking about, Andrea, the holy innocent, the perpetual child, the special connection with Jesus and the cross, or God's got them covered anyway, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
And so the framework, first of all, and Pope Francis has provided this beautifully when he elevated the role of the catechist, is of witness, right? Witness and accompanying folks on their journey. And so, and on my website, I have information about this. So it's disability and pastoral accompaniment. So the first step of accompaniment is to encounter. And that's to encounter the person, get to know the person individually, also to get to know experiences of disability. There's the range of them, but it's also recognizing that the experience of disability is influenced by both the condition someone has, my ADHD brain, for example, and if you give me a bunch of words on a piece of paper without any organization, I'm going to struggle to figure it out and process it. But then it's also what the expectations are, how the room is laid out, how we expect people to communicate, how we communicate, what kinds of words we use. It's helping people to realize that influences someone's experience of belonging. There's really great research that a guy named Eric Carter and colleagues did where it was in the Faith and Flourishing Project, and it was young adults and teens with intellectual disability or autism and their families, what do you want from your faith community? And the answer was to belong. Well, what does that look like? Well, there's really 10 dimensions of it, from being present to being welcome, support, invited, to be known, to be supported, to be cared for, to be needed, to be befriended, loved. I mean, all 10 dimensions need to be present for someone to feel that true sense of belonging. So I work with parishes to help recognize the experiences of feeling unwelcome, uninvited, invisible, ignored, and to come in contact with their own experiences of that. And so to come to see the person as a person first that feels disengaged and unwanted. And so, because there's good research that shows when in a community that professes respect for human dignity, if you can provide that sense of identification, it fosters empathy and compassion and a commitment to both recognize past transgressions and a desire to change behavior in the future. So it's trying to help emphasize the importance of relationship rather than content, and
recognizing the person as an individual is something that John and I have talked about a lot, where we'll see this parish and they say, oh, we're very welcoming, and we have this one disabled child that comes to mass and everybody knows their name, and
right.
Oh, his family is so great, and everyone they feel completely welcoming, belonging. And I'm like, that one child or that one adult is not representative of the entire disabled community in your parish. So just because that one family feels comfortable does not mean that you've hit everyone. And we talk a lot about that in in terms of like race as well, right? Like if you have one Black friend, their experience is not representative of the entire Black community. So that also extrapolates out to people with disabilities, because one wheelchair user is not going to have the same experience as a different wheelchair user. One person with autism is not going to have the same as someone who is deaf. So knowing these people as individuals is so important as just being, well, we have that one disabled kid and his family comes and they have great time.
Especially if you look at the data,
Mm-hmm.
right, in terms of how many folks there are with disabilities. If you don't have that representation in your congregation or your parish, you're missing people. And, and as to your point, my son has to listen to music when he needs to concentrate. I cannot listen to music. I wear earplugs if it's a noisy environment when I'm trying to concentrate. So, the experiences within a shared diagnosis is going to vary as much as across different disabilities.
Yeah, I think it's important that speaks to this posture that we need to take in entering into this world, and that's one of humility and learning. Not, I know this one person, so I understand, or I saw Rain Man 20 years ago and I know what it's like. I love the values that you have for your office: appreciation, empowerment, meaningful participation, relationships, and belonging. And we could spend an hour going through every one of those individually, but I've put them in the chat for people to see, along with a link to your office. And we'll come back to you in a little bit, Anne. But I want to transition to my conversation with Joellyn Cicciarelli. She's the president and publisher of Loyola Press in Chicago, and they offer some great resources for this. But it's not just a company offering resources. It is a person who has had experience in this, and it's impacted their life, and they've seen it impact the lives of others. So I had a conversation earlier with Joellyn, and I'm going to share that with you now. Joellyn, thank you for joining us today. And you're coming from Chicago. Is there anything interesting happening in Chicago right now?
It is kind of an exciting time in Chicago. We have a new pope who was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. So from very humble beginnings. It's beautiful.
And he's a Sox fan. Father Paul White will be very disappointed in that, but I think everything else makes up for it.
Yes. Initial reporting was a Cubs fan, but he is in fact a Sox fan. His brother confirmed. So we've been hearing stories in the local news about him playing Red Rover and then getting all the kids to come over and play Mass so he could celebrate the Mass with Necco wafers. So pretty great stuff.
That's awesome. Well, it's been great connecting with you over this topic, because you have some great stories behind it, and the origins of the work that Loyola Press has done in this. They come from heartfelt experiences that inspired it. And I want to just start with your life and what made this area of helping families and people with disabilities important to you.
Sure. So I think when you start to meet with and learn about people who advocate and serve children and people with disabilities, you find out that a lot of times they have a personal story that has inspired them to live and serve in this way. And I think it's the same for me, for sure. So I'm a former teacher, and I taught in 3 states, in Michigan, Illinois, and California, before getting into educational publishing and Catholic publishing. And I have a child who has a learning disability. My son, he's now grown, college grad, has a great job as a college track coach, but growing up, his life was a very big challenge. I sent my son to Catholic school. He was my youngest child, and we had a big decision to make, because the Catholic school didn't really have the services that he needed. We chose to keep him in Catholic schools, but to go out and find our way in getting him served. It is a painful experience for parents. It's a painful experience for a child, but ultimately it's a very satisfying experience when you can find the help and the materials and the services that the child needs to become successful. So that is my personal story and why I have such a passion for this type of work and these types of materials. Fast forward, I'm at Loyola Press. I'm the director of curricula development. So I'm running the division that builds educational materials for faith formation and for parishes and schools. And I sitting in my office one day, and one of our authors came in and he handed me an envelope and he said, I don't know what this is, but I was at a wedding and someone told me that it's to help children with disabilities receive their first Eucharist, to make their first communion. It's really strange. Can you take a look at it? I said, okay, sure. So I open up this FedEx envelope and out spills Velcro index cards. And what I instantly saw were what we call in educational publishing learning tools, very rudimentary, but seemed to be very interesting to me. So I read the cover letter, and it was from a family in New Jersey whose son and with his father embarked on an Eagle Scout project to develop learning materials so his 12-year-old sister, who is on the autism spectrum, could receive her first communion. She had been turned away year after year from the time she was 7, and they were finally able to convince pastor based on the materials that they had used to help her. So the USCCB has guidelines for the reception or for people to receive the sacraments and with people with disabilities. And the two for Eucharist are you have to be able to receive reverently, and you have to be able to distinguish Eucharist from ordinary food. And she was unable to do that until her brother and her dad helped make these tools. So I instantly saw the value and was instantly passionate. And I naively went into the leadership team and said, look at this, we've got to do this. And they looked at the Velcro and the index cards and the hand drawings, and they said, are you crazy? And I said, no, I'm not. And they said, how do we know that people need these things? How do we know they want these things? And so it became a personal mission for me to go out and find groups like the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, like the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., and their Office of Disabilities, Mary O'Mara there. And I got the backing from experts in the field. And I secretly met with my design manager, and we cooked up prototypes that were beautiful. And I went back in because I wasn't giving up. And my second time around, the leadership team said, we are going to invest in this. I have to tell you, I did make a promise to National Catholic Partnership on Disability that we would not just do this one kit and walk away. We promised to walk with them, journey with them, and continue to produce materials for children and adults with disabilities, which we have since 2008. So kind of before the curve, disabilities education and disabilities ministry is having a moment. And I hope it's like a long moment that never ends. And I feel like we were kind of on the cutting edge to the beginning phases of that. So that's a little bit about the story behind what we've created and are creating.
That's awesome. I love that story. And you shared another story with me. We're going to get to your resources in just a minute, but you shared another story with me, and you were emphasizing how it's not just having the tools, it's also the volunteer or the catechist really getting to know the person and knowing what's important to them. Share with everybody your story about how Star Wars helped someone understand God.
Sure, absolutely. So with our Adaptive Finding God program, there is a level, we have the hands-on level, and it's materials and resources, but also lesson plans and teaching methodologies for children for whom grade level is not important. They might be nonverbal, they might have developmental disabilities. And so it's for the earliest levels. And one of our tactics is to match the child with a near peer. So a teenager perhaps, or someone who's 18, 19, 20, someone near their age, but who is typically developing. So I was in the Archdiocese of Seattle watching at the cathedral, watching their pilot program of our Adaptive Finding God program. And I was visiting and walking around, And there was a young man on the autism spectrum with his teen faith mentor, so his near peer. And by the way, in Seattle, they had a master catechist who was a volunteer. She's a former special education teacher. So she would walk from group to group and just lightly supervise, but each pairing of kids. So if you can imagine, like 10 to 12 kids, dimly lit room, not a lot of sensory stuff going on, but each pair working together and her revolving around the room, helping them. And I noticed it with this one little pairing that the young man, the catechist, had brought in Star Wars Lego characters. So he had, you know, all of the characters, he had the spaceships, he had the creatures, and he and the young boy, I thought, are they playing Star Wars Legos? What's going on? So I sort of walk over and I'm listening. And what I soon discover is he's teaching him the creation story. He's teaching him Genesis by using Star Wars characters, because he had learned that this young man was just in love with Star Wars, and it was the thing that he connected to. So I stood and I watched a little longer. And by the end of the lesson, if you could call it that, it was a beautiful end of the relationship that was going on and the beautiful evangelizing catechesis. The young boy with autism was able to distinguish God's creation from, say, the spaceship. So the catechist would point to the spaceship and he would say, "Did God create this?" And the little boy would shake his head, "No." And then he would point to Luke Skywalker, "Did God create this?" And the little boy would say, "Yes." It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And we hear stories like this all the time. I think I was telling you about a grandfather who had a 27-year-old grandson with Down syndrome. And he approached me after a workshop and told me that for 20 years, he had been trying to have pastor allow his grandson to make his first communion, receive Eucharist. He had been turned away. And the grandfather said with tears in his eyes, "After 3 weeks of using your kit, your program, my grandson made his first communion and he goes to mass with me every week." And I think it's just the most beautiful thing. And I think it's one of the ways the church is going to survive and thrive is when we welcome everyone and we invite everyone to experience God's love through the sacraments and through the Mass. So yeah, I'm very passionate about this. I could talk about it all day, but yeah, those are a couple of stories. So.
I thought that was one of the great things that Pope Leo said when he first came out was he said, everyone belongs here, just like everyone is out here in this space. Everyone can come. And just that welcoming. Let's hear about your resources. Let's see what you've got for us here.
There's so many. And so I just brought a few. Back here, you'll see our plush figures, our plush Jesus and our plush Mary. Those are actually learning tools. Now, they are beautiful and they are also, just loved by typically developing children too. But we use these in our adaptive program so that children can understand that Jesus is their friend and Jesus loves them. So those are a couple of tools. The kit back there is the Adaptive Reconciliation Kit. We've now done kits in English and Spanish for all 3 sacraments. And I'll just show you a couple of things from them. This is a flip book for reconciliation. And what it does is it visually walks the child through what is going to happen as they celebrate the sacrament of penance and reconciliation. So you kneel, then you pray, then you sit. There's an examination of conscience. And we have within the kit lots and lots of tools. Like we have a beautiful examination of conscience card. So the child can point to the things that he or she may be sorry for. And then we also have these I'm sorry cards that are in the flip book. So if you're nonverbal, you can present these to Father so that Father knows and you're saying, I'm sorry. So beautiful little flip book. We have a very kind of similar tool for the Mass. It's called my picture missile. And it walks you through the steps of the Mass. So we know we go on Sunday, we go into the church, we're going to stand, we're going to sing the entrance song. So it's every step of the Mass. And then what's cool with this is we have cards. Here's the stand card. So a parent or family member could give it to the child as a reminder, a quiet reminder to stand and sit and kneel, which we Catholics love to do. But my favorite card, oh, there's a quiet card, which is a good one. We all kind of need that now. And then I love this card. It's a take a break card. So the child is able to give this to mom or dad to signal that they need to take a break. So these are little examples. Every kit comes with a helper guide. So it will help anyone. You don't have to have a special education degree to be able to use these tools. I mean, we have so much. This is a parent group facilitator guide for our adaptive program. And it gives you plans for family gatherings, parent gatherings. So here's a topic: setting goals for your child, faith formation, service, preparing and receiving sacraments, scripture, a group prayer, a discussion topic, common parent stressors, medical expenses, treatment consideration, tantrums, lack of observable progress. So we cover both practical and faith-based activities, or not activities, but considerations for parents. And this is like a support piece so that parents can come into the parish, meet with other parents, and talk about what's going on and how to help their kids. The beautiful little book called Different Gifts, Same Spirit, Creating an Inclusive Learning Community. And this is a book for typically developing children so that they can welcome friends with disabilities into their parish, into their faith formation sessions, into their schools. So this is kind of on the flip side. This helps typically developing kids be welcoming. These are cool. This is Steps to the Eucharist, Matt. So you literally put these on the floor in the parish, and the child or the person can look down and step by step know what to do to practice receiving the Eucharist. So these are great. So these are like physical, floor tiles. We just got a lot, and they can be used in homes, in schools, in parishes, and more comes all the time. So we love what we do here.
Well, it's awesome that you're going far beyond fulfilling your commitment to the National Catholic Partnership on Disability. You didn't just do a one-time thing, but you're continuing to grow your resources, and there is a movement happening, and it's so exciting. But Joellyn, thank you so much for joining with us today. We're going to send a lot of people your way. I know that Valerie Vogel is going to be available to connect with people if they need to, and we'll send folks to your website to find out more.
So appreciate your time. It's so much fun to talk about, and God bless you and your work and all the people that you're serving. Thank you so much.
Great stuff there with Joellyn, and there will be links to all those resources in the email that goes out after this. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, just scroll down to the description of the webinar. You'll see links there. I often, when I have these webinars, I get emails from people that say, I can't make it. Is it going to be recorded? Every webinar is recorded. They're all on our YouTube channel, and you can watch previous webinars there. It's all free. Just go to YouTube, search for Great Catholic Parishes, and you'll find it there. Well, I want to move along as we're coming to the end of our time here. I want to be sure that we hit this topic of sensory-friendly masses. I know a lot of you are interested in that, and that was my first introduction to all of this world. Before we share an interview with a parishioner in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where they have had an extraordinarily successful and just beautiful sensory-friendly Mass, I want to go to a quick story from EWTN that talked about this and covers a lot more of it than we can in this webinar. So let's check this out now.
Creating a safe and welcoming space where everyone feels accepted and can be themselves.
With the sensory Mass, she was able to sit through beautifully today.
This is what Nativity Catholic Church in Burke, Virginia strives to be with its sensory Mass. It's like regular Mass, but with a few changes.
Dimming the lighting, softer sounds, turning down the speaker system, less music, and quieter times.
A sensory Mass helps reduce overstimulation and sensory overload. Many people benefit from this environment, including those with sensory processing challenges, autism, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and adults with Alzheimer's disease and dementia.
When I heard that 20% of the population struggles with that and would not be able to come to Mass, I said, I think we need to take a look at this. It got my attention. Because I really believe in opening wide the doors for those with developmental disabilities, and because they bring so many gifts to the church.
Monsignor Bob Selinsky is the pastor at Nativity. He tells us that the sensory Mass was a product of grassroots efforts.
It initiated by one of our parents who have children on the spectrum, and which led her to become an expert and a teacher in working with those who have sensory integration challenges.
That parishioner was Tracy Hewlin.
So I had noticed at church that we had a lot of families that were standing in the back, and they didn't have the availability to go into the training room because there were a lot of babies and crying, and some of the children needed a little bit more movement, so being in the pews was a little bit difficult.
With Monsignor Bob on board, Hewlin partnered up with the Parish's Family Ministry Coordinator and Special Religious Development Team. For 2 years, they went to work planning for the Parish's first sensory Mass. Part of that included preparing a variety of regulation tools for people to use, such as noise cancellation headphones, fidget toys, and wobble stools. They even created a special missalette.
We have a adapted missalette, and inside it has a visual schedule of the Mass, and so they can check off the different parts of the Mass as they occur. And for somebody that needs that predictability of what's going to happen, and in the Mass we have a lot of loud parts and quiet parts.
Priests at Nativity were also part of the training. Monsignor Bob explains how he changes his homily for sensory Mass.
So whatever the message is, 3 sentences is ideal, repeat it 3 times, and then sit down, and then silence. And it can be a really powerful homily.
Prepare the way of the Lord. Live in hope.
After much hard work, Nativity Church celebrated its first once-a-month sensory Mass in August. Joellyn Cicciarelli and her daughter Jill have been attending since.
It's wonderful. I am thrilled, and I am so thrilled to have Jill back in the pews, receiving Eucharist.
Lorraine explains that Jill has autism spectrum disorder and is extremely sensitive to noises, that it would be very difficult for her to sit through regular Mass. So for many years, Jill did not go to church for Mass and only watched Masses online.
She would be overwhelmed with overwhelming visual stimulation by the crowds. The noise, things that don't bother a neurotypical person, would be really upsetting to her. And just as an idea of how difficult it was for her, she would be sitting in Mass and would sneak her pencil out and just would be digging in her nails until they bled.
Now, Jill is able to sit through the entirety of sensory Mass, and if she needed a break, she can go to one of the sensory rooms available. Monsignor Bob says every time they have the sensory Mass, the congregation keeps growing, and he has met so many new families. The Nativity Parish community hopes its sensory Mass gains attention so that more sensory Masses will be available nationwide.
Well, it wouldn't be the Church of Jesus Christ if people were left out, because Jesus reached out to everyone. Hopefully, others will be able to respond to that need and would want to in their own diocese and in their own parishes.
Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
Awesome. Such a great story and great insight into all of this. As we wrap up, I want to share my conversation with Sarah Olson. Sarah is a parishioner at St. Vincent de Paul in Fort Wayne, Indiana. As you will hear, Sarah has 9 children, and she has several children with disabilities. And she was inspired to bring this idea to her pastor. And she's going to share with us the story of that and what that led to and how that's just incredibly impacted people's lives today. So let's go to that. Sarah, thank you for joining us today. And you know what, you've had the chance to be a part of something pretty extraordinary. But it started out with a need, and it started out with you speaking up about that need. But first, tell us about your needs as a mom and a family, and then how that led to this idea of maybe doing a sensory-friendly Mass at your parish.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So we have 9 children. One has autism, another one ADHD, and then 2 that are deaf. And we just really struggled to go to Mass as a family. And my kids are gonna knock right now. I have 2 little ones at home, and it was hard to get through Mass. And we had some physical aggression stuff going on, a lot of yelling, a lot of staring. And so I went to, one of our priests and asked, if having a sensory friendly Mass was something that they would consider. And they said yes. And so it started with 30 of us and has just grown.
Well, that is a very quick version of it all happening. I wish everyone could just go to their priest and get an immediate yes. But you did some research first. You kind of knew what you were asking for, but they were bringing some Masses back. They were considering bringing back some Mass times. In the past, it had been a 12:30. You chose to do a 1:30. How does that work out for you and your family and everyone else?
Yeah. So it was like right around COVID time and right after COVID, like 2021, when I brought it up, and we used to have a 12:30 Mass. They were like, well, maybe we could do it at 1:30 because they usually do the baptisms in there. So it was, strategic for them also. And, but the time, although it was a big adjustment for our family because we were going to the 9 a.m. Mass. And when he said 1:30, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know how that's going to work out because 9 worked well if it was going to go well because of nap times and meals and all of that, and 1:30 kind of changed that. But God is good, and it has been really beautiful because it's the center of our day. We get up, and just the whole day is in preparation for church and for Mass and for Christ, and then afterwards we're kind of just slower and we make a big Sunday dinner together. And so it's been really just life-changing really for our family.
I think it's interesting when it comes to change of when we go to Mass, change of our schedule. We think about all the things that's going to throw off, and it doesn't even enter our minds that there might be benefits from this change. And as you said, by the Mass being in the middle of the day, it kind of is like the anchor of your Sabbath, right in the middle of everything, right?
Yeah. The Eucharist is the center of the Mass. It's, it's a shorter Mass, usually about 35 minutes, I'd say on most days, 35, maybe 40. But the Eucharist is the center of the Mass, and then the Mass is the center of our day. And it all just is surrounding that. We look forward to it. Even our son with autism, all of our kids, like it's just been beautiful.
And tell us how the Mass is different than the 9 o'clock Mass that you used to go to.
Yeah. So there's no music, no organ, nothing like that, no singing. The lights are low, and the prayers of the faithful are shortened. They're very literal. Instead of saying a lot of other stuff, it's just for the poor or for pregnant women or for unborn babies. We pray. The homilies are shortened, and for the most part, I mean, they all do a really good job of trying to make them more literal. Yeah, that's like the main things. We have a brochure kind of letting people know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Well, you mentioned to me when we talked earlier about in your brochure, it has this quote from Saint Therese just on how she approached distractions. And I'm just going to read it here. She said that distractions are opportunities to pray for those who are causing the distraction.
Yes.
turning them into acts of love and service. So first recognize the distraction, then pray for the cause of the distraction, and then turn it into an act of love by praying for them and caring for them. And I think that's just such a beautiful, I mean, we should think about that in every mass, right?
Yes. Well, and everywhere we go, like if we're busy thinking we're doing one thing and then someone or something is distracting us, okay, let's, even in our driving, somebody's driving really slow and you're like, oh, pray for them. Maybe. So yeah, no, we have that on our brochure. Oh, and I forgot to mention the other thing that we just started too is we are providing sensory bags, and they have different booklets like the missal in like a child's or larger print, some fidget toys, like squishy things, a little weighted lamb or sheep, which we just think is really cute for kids to kind of sit on their lap and help. It's like a weighted lap pad, but it's a cute little sheep. Also like a picture, like a follow along where you can take your little sheep and follow along with the mass. They're like Velcroed on there. We made those and had them laminated, and a couple other moms and myself kind of put these together. And you can come and make your sensory bag after mass or before mass. And we also have like noise canceling headphones that they can come and use and borrow. And yeah, I think that's it as far as like things that we have kind of in the gathering space that we're trying out too.
That's great. I think I've kind of buried the headline here, and that is that you started this with how many people?
30, and 12 were my family.
So almost half of the people at this first mass were your family.
Yeah.
And what do you have on an average Sunday now at 1:30?
Most of the time, like 800 at least. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
And how does that affect the environment? Obviously, you were trying to keep a low stress kind of distraction-free environment. You are not in a distraction-free environment right now.
Sorry. Yeah, no, so I think, initially we did have like more quiet areas, but as it has grown, that's kind of changed. And people are kind of finding what works for them and kind of where they go. And new people will come and ask like, hey, this is what, my child or my loved ones or what I need. And, whether that's even staying in the gathering space, if it's quieter or more comfortable or more spaced out, like they'll kind of sit back there. And if you can't physically make it all the way up to communion, we will bring communion back to them.
It sounds like one of the most important parts is that people understand that it's a safe place for them and their kids, that they'll be accommodated if it's at all possible, and that they don't need to worry about being judged with things being different for their family at this mass.
Yeah. I had a woman who stopped me in the restroom actually just to tell me that she, I think, said she had 7 children and like 5 of them had ADHD. And I think she was a single mother, and she was like, it's the first time I can even come to mass with all of my kids and just finally like breathe. Like she was like, she was in the restroom during mass and she was like, I left my kids like, and I know they're okay. Like, and I was like, that's beautiful. Thank you. Like, I'm so glad that you're here. And we're so glad that everyone comes, however they are.
That's great. Well, for all the people that are out there that are saying they don't have time to serve or volunteer in the parish, and you have 9 kids and you're making sensory bags and you're Eucharistic minister and you're a usher and I don't know what else you are.
Sacristan, yeah.
I'm going to point them your way.
Yes. Well, like I shared with you, it was like when I went to our priest and I asked, and he was like, well, we're going to need people to step up and help. And so my sister lectors, other moms with children with special needs, which I would have never thought I could even leave the pew with all my kids just left with my husband, because all chaos, would have occurred, just all the different ages. And I'm rarely at the pew because of all the things that I'm doing, the ushering, the sacristan, and extraordinary minister. And I think as a parent with children with special needs, you almost isolate yourself and you get you have so many things to do, so many things to worry about. You're so worried about, are your kids going to behave and this and that? And now it has been so much more like giving to me and like filling me up in ways like greeting people at the beginning of mass or welcoming them and finding community when I didn't know there would be such immense like growth for me and beauty in that.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
Last, just tell me, you said that you were incorporating some of these kids and some of these adults with disabilities in serving in the Mass.
Yes, yeah. So we have some who, whether it's like physical or Down syndrome, developmental. My son for a while was even being a server, but our head server who was a high school kid who was volunteering his time. He was serving at other masses and then coming to our mass to allow, to allow kids to be able to do that. But we have them ushering. We have one that's interested in even doing reading one of the petitions right now. And so she's working on memorizing it. It's a really simple petition. I mean, like our priest is so good. Is like, we'll bring them a microphone down if they physically can't get up to the podium. Other families, people will come and be like, oh, it brings me such joy to see them, to see, you know, and they're joyful in it. I mean, the most joyful people I've ever met are these children and their families. Like once they're able to like serve in that way and they feel comfortable doing it, like they're so joyful.
Well, obviously, if you have, 500 to 800 people coming to this Mass, they're not all people that would necessarily fit into the typical description of disabilities or special needs. But there's also a broad range of that, right? Of what that means for different people. But I think one reason people come is because it's so beautiful to see a place where people can worship God in freedom and they're not being judged, and there's just seems to be so much joy in that.
Yeah. Even parents of like young children are saying they find more comfortable, like they're more comfortable there. If their kids are loud or misbehave for like they're not getting stares or judged. That's like one of our populations, middle-aged women with anxiety. We have a lot of, who have expressed like they're finally able to come to Mass again and just relax. So it's been, just such a joy. A lot of elderly people who come, even like they're coming up and saying, oh, like the joy in watching, whether it's a young boy who stands and rocks the entire Mass, like, but he's so joyful in that. And that's how he worships and loves the Lord, is by standing and rocking. And he is so joyful in that. And no one's, like distracted by it or just watching. I mean, like you're engaged in the Mass and it is so beautiful. It's so quiet. It's, even with all those other I don't know, you just are so much more intimate with the Lord. And I think because everybody's just at peace being there.
Yes, and I think he's there. And
yes,
he said, let the children come to me. And I think this is a Mass where that's literally
they're
happening.
coming. Yeah.
Awesome.
And again, like I shared with you earlier, like if at any point, I pray that it always glorifies the Lord. And if at any point it doesn't, then that's when it should end, and just want to do his will. So.
Well, thank you for doing his will. When we talked before this, you said, I'm just a nobody, but you are somebody who said yes. And you invited other people to say yes. And that's how things happen. And here we are talking about it. And just thank you for saying yes and for serving the Lord and raising all those great kids.
Trying. Thank you.
Isn't that awesome? I'm going to use that interview for many things in speaking to parishes about volunteer engagement, because if a woman with 9 kids and 3 of them have special needs can serve and give her time, I think we all can. I think the other thing I really got out of my conversation with her is how much this changed her life as a volunteer. It's not just about the people that we're serving and accompanying. Whenever we engage and give of ourselves and enter into God's work in other people's lives, it changes us. I think that's important to remember as well. One other thing I wanted to say about the sensory-friendly Mass is my father had Alzheimer's. And later stages of that, it was more and more difficult to go to church. And I can just think how wonderful it would be if we could just go and sit and know that if he waved at the lector and said, "Hey, Bob," because he knows him, wouldn't mean anything to anybody. It would just be normal. Again, creating that place where people feel loved and accepted, regardless of kind of what's happening. I wanted to put out one closing question to you, Anne and Andrea. Beatrice emailed me and said, what role can volunteers or support staff play in assisting individuals with disabilities during Mass? And I would add also throughout this experience, and how can they be effectively trained for this?
I mean, that's a tough question, because with people with disabilities, it takes a lot of self-advocating. So it's what I think is important is having someone with the disabilities or a family member on their behalf, leading these conversations and being part of these conversations, instead of a neurotypical group being like, well, we need to help these people. We need to, it's never good for our outsiders to be making decisions for, there always needs to be someone included in representative of that community. I think Anne would agree with that.
Yeah, so it's part of an overall conversation, orientation that also incorporates culture development. And that was one of the answers I put in when someone was asking about elderly folks who maybe don't want crying babies around. But it's, I think part of it is first asking the question. So pastoral staff asking the question, you can do it even in a survey format, or just, is there anything impeding your ability to participate as fully as you want to? And asking and what those are. And so absolutely, to Andrea's point, yes, folks without disabilities need to make sure that folks with disabilities are participating in these conversations and having that open exchange, and doing it within the framework that, as Monsignor Bob at St. Vincent that was at Nativity Parish in Burke. He was very much open to, gosh, I hadn't realized this, and there's a lot of people impacted. So that, and I think you talked about it too, being willing to learn. Yo-Yo Ma has like a very short book talk on a beginner's mind. It's recognizing we don't know what we don't know. And so it's really important to realize becoming educated to all the things that impede access that we take for granted.
Right. And to look at your own behavior, and even if it was meant well, how it could have offended, hurt, or disenfranchised a particular individual, and be willing to own those mistakes and say, I'm going to move forward in a way that does not do that anymore.
It's not a them and us.
Correct.
And in fact, the Italian bishops have a series of conferences that they've been doing. It's us, not them, disability in the church. That is part of that paradigm shift. And that's, and even recognizing as the body of Christ, we are much more together than individually. The body of Christ is not a bunch of individual gifts coming together. The Spirit is most active and present in those interpersonal spaces. It's in our interactions that we each become more together. And so, because we all have gaps, we all have strengths, right? So start with emphasizing, even in the conversations that was asked in the email, begin with someone's strengths. What are they good at? What do they like to do? And then, it's like the Star Wars, example. Or I did a theology of sin with Lord Voldemort and Harry Potter with confirmation candidates. It's like, engaging with people in their interests and motivations, and then recognizing that we can all help each other in different ways.
I think what you're both pointing towards is starting with the discovery process of who is here and engaging the people that are there in all of this, in conversation, in growing in understanding, in understanding the needs of our parish, and letting those people lead the charge, but empowering them to lead the charge. I would encourage you to create a coalition of some type. I don't like the word committee because that's a bunch of people sitting around making decisions and not really doing anything from my experience. But I like the idea of a coalition of people that are activated and engaged and empowered to work towards a common goal. Discern what the best next steps are for your parish. You know, I was just at St. Jerome in Waco, and they said, right now, we're not changing anything. We're just learning for a while. And they're also working with the Diocese of Austin to create helpful resources for their diocese. One thing you can do right away is you can appoint a staff or a volunteer to be the point person for all of this, and that everyone knows who they are. That if anyone has a disability or a need, they can go to this staff person or this volunteer who's going to be an advocate for them and help them navigate the current process in the meantime. Because one thing I know Andrea and I've talked about, you don't want to have to tell your story over and over and over again to every catechist, every leader. If you can have a staff person that navigates that for you and with you and is an advocate for you in it, it could make all the difference in the world. Educate your parishioners. That happens in homilies, that can happen in short videos, but a huge part of this is culture change and understanding change. One of the questions was, what about our older parishioners who seem to complain the most? I think we can try. I think we can work on educating them. I think there's also a generational thing that we might just have to accept in some ways, although we're going to communicate what we believe to be true. But you can definitely educate your PCLs, your ministry leaders, your staff, your pastor, that we can all approach it from a healthier perspective. We could go on and talk about this for a long time, but we've run out of time for our webinar today.
Could I just say one thing?
Yes.
One thing, that it's great to have a point person as long as the point person isn't the only one concerned with the issues.
Absolutely. They're the advocate to engage others. And I had one other question about the sensory-friendly mass, where someone said, how do we prevent that from being the place that everyone tries to send people? Like coming up to someone in a traditional mass saying, you should go to that other mass. And part of that is educating the whole congregation that, hey, everyone is welcome at every mass.
Right.
And like one of you put the quote in the chat, if your parish isn't crying, it's dying. But I was at a parish in Houston recently, and the welcome at the beginning of the mass said, we love families here, and we know that that's messy and that they make noise, and that's the noise of a growing parish. And they were really communicating to the rest of the parish, this is welcome here. So, and absolutely, they can't be the only person, but they're where someone knows to go when they're in need. So thank you, Anne. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Joellyn. Great stuff. And please feel free to email us directly if you have any questions. All right. Thank you all. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.